I previously worked as a night guard and was required to follow some unusual rules. After leaving my job at mall security, I was on the hunt for a role that carried similar responsibilities. There was something captivating about the authority it held. Not that I harbored any dictatorial desires. Rather, I relished the sense of patrolling in a uniform. Strangely, I found it enjoyable, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Those were a tough few weeks without work until I landed a night shift position at a storage unit facility on the city's outskirts. The property manager seemed as eager to hire me as I was to start. In Minnesota, the cold was biting, with Christmas just around the corner. I was buzzing with excitement about the holiday, planning to visit my family in Chicago. The prospect of exchanging gifts, savoring delicious meals, and enjoying lively company was thrilling. At 27, the novelty of legally drinking still hadn't worn off. I'm no alcoholic, but unwinding with a cold beer after a taxing day seemed perfectly harmless. On the evening I was to begin my first shift, I relaxed in my cluttered apartment, binge-watching a series on Netflix until it neared 7 p.m. Living solo, I never worried about my casual home attire disturbing anyone. It wasn't that I lacked ambition, I simply saw no need to push beyond expectations. Yet, whenever I exerted effort, the sense of achievement was undeniable. However, tonight was different. I had picked up my security uniform from a house a few days earlier, oddly not at the building itself, which I found peculiar but didn't question too deeply. Dressed and ready, I prepared to embark on this new chapter. This was going to be my first time seeing the building in person. I had already written down the address, so I got into my car and headed out toward the storage facility. Having lived in the city my whole life, I was pretty used to the chaotic traffic, but even at night, the streets were busier than I expected. My shift was supposed to start at 9, but the heavy traffic delayed me by almost an hour. My initial excitement began to fade, replaced by frustration as drivers cut me off or moved so slowly that walking seemed like a faster option. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that getting angry over traffic wasn't worth it. The job itself was definitely worth the trouble of the drive. After what felt like forever, I finally reached the storage facility. It was even more isolated than I had imagined. The building was large and square, made of cement with 2 heavy iron doors at the front, locked together with a thick chain. I had the key for the lock. Behind the facility was a creepy-looking forest, just trees and bushes stretching as far as I could see. I felt a bit of relief knowing I was completely alone out here, which meant there was little chance of having to deal with any break-ins. This job was shaping up to be easier than I had expected, and with a paycheck well above minimum wage, I couldn't believe my luck. I parked my car to the side of the building, near where the iron door ended and the cement wall continued. Reaching into the back seat, I grabbed my nightstick, flashlight, and the keys before stepping out of the car. As I walked toward the massive doors, I kept my eyes focused on the concrete. The night was strangely quiet, but instead of making me uneasy, I found the stillness kind of soothing. For once, there were no sounds of cars, buses, or trains. The silence was almost unsettling. I found the right key and raised my head to unlock the chain. But as I looked up, I froze in place. A sudden chill ran through me, and I jumped back, accidentally dropping the key. What on earth? There were deep, long scratches on the iron doors where the lock was. They looked like something huge, maybe a bear on steroids, had clawed at it. Just a moment ago, the doors had been perfectly smooth and clean, almost spotless. To make things worse, the lock's chains had been broken. Whatever had made those scratches had cut through the metal, and I hadn't heard a single sound, despite standing right next to it. My hands were shaking as I muttered, "Well, guess I don't need the key after all," and picked it up, slipping it back into my pocket. I placed my hands on the iron doors, took a deep breath, and pushed with all the strength I had. Thankfully, the doors had some sort of built-in assistance, or I would have needed a lot more muscle or explosives to get them open. As they creaked and groaned, it felt like the doors were whispering, like they had their own voices. After what felt like a minute of struggling, I finally got the doors fully open and stepped inside. The interior was simple. A long hallway about 10 feet wide ran down the center, with storage units lining both sides. At the far end, there was a wooden desk with a black leather chair behind it and a small glass window overlooking the desk. That's where I was supposed to be stationed for the night. Above, a metal balcony ran around the entire rectangular space, following the perimeter of the building. After closing the doors behind me using the same effort it took to open them, I could have sworn I saw something. A small, frail boy, just standing there and staring at me. My heart skipped a beat, but before I could process it, the heavy slam of the doors echoed through the room, and everything fell silent again. I figured it was just my mind playing tricks on me, maybe from the lack of noise or stimulation I was used to in the city. I took a few extra seconds to ensure the doors were completely shut and locked, not that I was worried anyone would be able to get in. With the doors secured, I walked down the hallway toward the security desk. Before sitting down, something caught my eye to the left. On the wall was an old, worn wooden door that looked much older than the building itself. The door was covered in strange chalk drawings, mostly creepy symbols. The only one I recognized was a pentagram. I figured some teenagers had broken in long before and decided to vandalize the place for fun. It didn't really bother me, though I did wonder how they managed to get past the locked doors in the first place. Then I remembered the owner had mentioned a basement used for extra storage or maintenance tools. I guess that explained it. I shrugged off the thought and sat down at the desk, rummaging through the drawers to find anything useful. After a couple of minutes, I found the employee handbook for security. It didn't seem like it would be too hard to keep an eye on this place. But what really caught my attention was a piece of paper beneath the handbook. Written in the same chalk as the symbols on the basement door, the paper was titled, "The Rules." The handwriting was messy, like it had been scribbled by a child. At the top, it read, "Follow these rules exactly. They could save your life." The first rule stood out immediately. Rule 1. If you hear footsteps coming up from the basement stairs, stay in your chair. Do not approach the door or make any sound. Sit quietly and wait for 30 seconds. That was Rule 1. I kept reading. Rule 2. If a tall, scruffy-haired girl with long, dirty fingernails asks you where her brother is, respond with the exact words, "I haven't seen him lately." Rule 3. If you hear scratching from the garage near the big iron doors on the right, walk up to it and tap your nightstick 3 times against the door. Don't speak or make any noise. It doesn't like that. Rule 4. At midnight, you'll hear the sound of a little girl crying from the woods behind the building. No matter how real it seems, do not investigate. Rule 5. If you see a man with torn clothes, deformed skin, pitch black eyes, and a huge, eerie grin standing near the entrance to the forest, smile and give him a small wave. Then turn away and ignore him, even if he taps on the glass. After reading through these rules, I couldn't help but think it was all a joke. Maybe the owner or the previous guard wrote them to mess with me. There's no way any of this could be real, right? I quickly shoved the paper back into the drawer, deciding it wasn't worth my time. I pulled out the actual employee handbook, which was much more standard: how to handle trespassers, check for break-ins, basic security protocols. It seemed a lot simpler than I expected, but the thought of sitting here for hours made me wish I had brought something to pass the time besides my old flip phone. Yeah, I still used a flip phone, and it wasn't even getting any signal out here. To keep myself entertained, I grabbed a pencil from the desk and started tapping it rhythmically. At first, it was just a quiet, simple beat to amuse myself while I monitored the security cameras. But then, something weird happened. The tapping got louder. At first, I thought I was hitting the desk harder, but I wasn't. The sound kept growing, far louder than my light tapping should have been. That's when I realized it wasn't the pencil anymore. It was the sound of rapid, unnaturally fast footsteps racing up the basement stairs. The footsteps were fast, aggressive, and filled with a kind of hostility that made my skin crawl. Whatever was charging up the stairs was not only quick but massive, and it had to be strong, definitely stronger than me. I had no desire to find out firsthand. My heart pounded as I felt a wave of cold fear sweep over me. Without even thinking, I curled my toes tightly in my shoes and slowly opened the drawer to retrieve the paper with the rules. Rule 1. If you hear footsteps rapidly approaching up the basement stairs, stay in your chair. Don't go near the door or make any noise. Sit quietly and wait for 30 seconds. The footsteps grew louder and more repetitive, echoing in the hallway. Then, everything stopped except for the sound of heavy breathing. It wasn't tired breathing, it was angry, like whatever it was wanted something or someone. Probably me. I couldn't tell if it was male or female, but I could feel its hunger, like it hadn't eaten in days. My body stiffened in the chair. My breathing was uneven, my hands trembling with fear. But I followed the rule and stayed silent. Every instinct in me screamed to shout or run, but I knew doing that would be a death sentence. Images of what could be lurking behind the door flashed through my mind, some kind of creature no doubt wanting to hurt me. I knew staying quiet was my only chance at surviving, yet I could sense it knew I was there, aware of my presence despite my silence. The breathing grew louder, but it didn't touch or knock on the door. Just knowing it was there made me shake uncontrollably, like a scared child. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the 30 seconds passed. I heard the footsteps again, this time running back down the stairs just as fast as they had come up. As the footsteps faded into the distance, back into the basement, I let out a shaky breath, feeling like I could finally breathe again. Whatever that thing was, it had gone back down to wherever it came from, probably some sort of hellhole disguised as a basement. It took me a minute to gather my courage and get myself to move. Slowly, I focused on calming my breath, trying to return to some sense of normalcy after the horror I had just experienced. I wish I could say that my previous experiences had somehow prepared me for this, but they hadn't, not even close. I kept reading and rereading the piece of paper with the rules, trying to burn them into my mind. At this point, it would be foolish not to keep the paper with me at all times. I wasn't going to take any chances without it. None of this felt real. Why hadn't the owner warned me about this place? Why wasn't it shut down or abandoned? I felt like I was in some twisted nightmare, if not hell itself. Leaving early wasn't an option. Stepping outside now seemed like a death sentence. As long as I stayed inside and kept the doors sealed, I figured I might stand a chance of surviving. I checked my phone. No signal, of course, but at least it still told the time. It was 11:30 p.m., creeping closer to midnight. To calm my nerves, I paced back and forth between the storage units, clutching my nightstick in one hand and the rules in the other. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It felt like this place didn't want me here, didn't want anyone here. As I continued pacing, I reached the far end of the hallway and glanced at the garage doors, checking to make sure everything was secure. No weak spots, no issues. I can't wait for this to be over, I muttered under my breath. After finishing my little inspection, I turned to walk back to my desk and instantly regretted it. Standing in front of the desk was a towering figure. A woman, nearly 8 feet tall, with long, scraggly black hair that hung all the way down to her legs, covering most of her face except for a bit of her forehead. She was impossibly thin, and her appearance was disturbingly unnatural. Her fingernails were between 4 and 6 inches long, dirty and cracked, with what looked like dried blood on them. But what made me flinch the most wasn't her height or her nails. It was the fact that she was completely nude, yet had no visible features typical of a human female. She didn't look real. She looked like something out of a nightmare. She stood there motionless, staring down at me without so much as a breath. Her eyes were fixed on mine. "Have you seen my brother?" Her voice was raspy, like metal scraping against stone. It wasn't deep, but the sound was rough and grated, sending chills down my spine. I froze, unsure of what to do. Panic set in, and my mind went blank. I couldn't remember the rules, not even a single one. "Answer me!" she screamed. The building seemed to shake under the force of her voice, and my heart pounded in my chest. No, I haven't, I promise," I stammered. My mind raced. I'd said the wrong thing. I wasn't supposed to say that. Her head snapped to the side so fast it looked like she'd broken her neck. Her hair stayed in place, covering most of her face, except for her cold, piercing eyes. I clenched my nightstick tightly, preparing myself in case she lunged at me. But she didn't move. She just stood there, watching me, completely still. I didn't dare blink, my eyes burning as I forced them to stay open. I didn't want to look away for even a second, but eventually, I had to blink. and in that split second, she disappeared. I whipped my head around, searching frantically to see if she was still in the building. The room was empty, but I knew deep down this wouldn't be the last time I saw her. I let out a shaky breath, relieved that the space was clear for now, but I kept a tight grip on my nightstick. With my other hand, I pulled out the paper with the rules, desperate to check how badly I had messed up. Rule number 2. If a tall, scraggly-haired girl with long, dirty fingernails asks where her brother is, tell her, I haven't seen him lately. Seeing my mistake written in front of me did nothing to calm me down. My hands were slick with sweat, and I tried to take deeper breaths to steady myself. But it wasn't working. My nerves were shot. Then, I noticed something disturbing. On the back of my left wrist, a pentagram had been carved into my skin. I hadn't felt any pain or a blade cutting me, but there it was, fresh and red, like it had just been scratched minutes ago. It wasn't bleeding much, but the sight of it made me realize it was a punishment for breaking one of the rules. I checked my phone again, 11:58 p.m. Midnight was fast approaching. I went back to my desk, sat down, and rested my head on the wood, bracing myself for what was coming. Sure enough, as soon as the clock struck 12, I heard the sound of a girl crying from the forest behind the building. It wasn't just crying, though. It was more like screams of pure agony. Please, please help me. The voice echoed through the trees, desperate and pained. I didn't dare go near the window. I knew better than to look outside. Whatever was out there wasn't human, and I wasn't about to let it lure me into a trap. I stayed completely still, though every instinct in me screamed to run, jump in my car, and drive as far away as possible. But I knew leaving now wasn't an option. Whatever was out there would make sure I didn't get far. I just had to wait. The crying continued, becoming more frantic, the voice pleading for help. It's getting me. Please, please help. Her cries grew more unsettling, the sound twisting into something unnatural, until eventually, it seemed like her vocal cords were tearing apart. I figured the entity had realized I wasn't going to take the bait. After about 5 minutes, the screams finally faded into silence. But the quiet outside didn't bring me any comfort. It felt eerie, like the calm before another storm. I hesitated, but eventually took a glance out the window behind my desk. To my relief, there was nothing, just the dark shapes of trees and bushes. Somehow, though, that emptiness made me feel even more uneasy. I leaned forward in my chair, keeping my eyes fixed on the hallway while my back was turned to the window. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker. After a few seconds, one of them popped and shattered, sending sparks and bits of glass onto the floor. My heart raced, worried a fire might break out. The flickering got worse, and then all the lights went out at once, plunging the room into complete darkness. I couldn't see a thing, but I felt something behind me, something evil. You didn't follow the rules, came a voice that sent chills down my spine. I could almost feel its cold breath on me. No, no, please, I shouted, panicked. I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't handle another second in this nightmare. I needed to get out. Fueled by pure adrenaline, I jumped out of my chair and ran blindly through the dark hallway. I reached the iron doors at the end, using muscle memory to yank them open. As I struggled, I could hear strange laughter all around me, mocking me, making me feel like there was no escape, that I was doomed no matter what. But I managed to pull the doors open, and the moonlight poured in, lighting up the building like it was daylight. I didn't hesitate. I ran straight to my car, fumbled for the keys, and shoved them into the lock, flinging the door open and jumping into the driver's seat. Whatever had been chasing me didn't seem to care that I was escaping, or maybe it wanted me to leave. The laughter only grew louder as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, my foot pressing the gas pedal to the floor. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw him, the man from the note. His torn suit, deformed skin, and razor-sharp, rotting teeth were just as described. His lifeless black eyes stared back at me, and that huge, unnatural grin spread across his face. He waved at me slowly as I drove away, his grin unchanged, even as I left him far behind. From that moment on, I swore I'd never work a night shift again, no matter how good the pay was. It's been a few weeks now. I've been taking time off and talking to a therapist I can barely afford, trying to make sense of everything that happened that night. Of course, I didn't tell my therapist the full story. I just kept scrolling through my phone, ignoring any calls or messages from the building's owner. In fact, I even blocked his number. I wanted nothing to do with him after what happened. When I called the police and gave them all the information I could about the place and the owner, they didn't find enough evidence to investigate further. That's when I realized I'd have to do my own digging. I wanted the owner to pay for what he'd put me through. Maybe that sounds a bit extreme, but if you were in my shoes, I'm sure you'd be angry too. No one deserves to be lured into something like that. One day, as I was searching online for any leads, I stumbled across a news article that instantly grabbed my attention with the headline, "Security Guard at Will's Storage House Missing." After only 2 days on duty, police say. I felt bad for the guy, but I knew this was the break needed to start an investigation. A necessary evil, you could say. 2 days, I thought. He lasted longer than I did. I had to give him credit for that. But as I read deeper into the article, I learned that he vanished without a trace. The only clue was his car, still parked outside the building. No one would believe me, but I knew the truth. Those creatures, those entities, whatever they were, had taken him. I had broken the rules too, but I got lucky. I survived. I couldn't say the same for him. So, to everyone reading this, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Always trust your gut, or you might end up like the poor soul in the news.